Imagine being dragged onto a battlefield to fight for a king you secretly hate. It's night in ancient China. The Bronze Age is at its peak. The Shang dynasty has ruled for centuries, with palaces, chariots, and cruel sacrifices to the gods. But tonight, outside a place called Muye, something is very, very wrong. Opposite the Shang stands a new army, the Zhou, fewer in number, but burning with purpose. They've marched for days to overthrow a tyrant, and in the Shang ranks, tens of thousands of soldiers, many of them peasants and slaves forced to fight for the very dynasty that has crushed them for generations. The drums thunder. The king raises his flag. The order to charge is given. And then, in one impossible moment, part of his own army turns around. Spears drop, shields fall. Men stop fighting for their king and start fighting against him. What happens next will erase a dynasty, rewrite the mandate of heaven, and prove that even the mightiest Bronze Age superpower can be destroyed in a single night. When its own soldiers decide they've had enough, this is the Battle of Muye, the night a peasant army ended a kingdom. Long before the night at Muye, long before peasants dared to turn their spears around, there was a time when the Shang dynasty seemed unshakable. In the fertile plains of the Yellow River, bronze flashed in the sun. Chariots rattled along packed earth roads. Oracles cracked hot bones in temple fires to read the will of the gods. And above everyone, like a mountain of ritual and power, stood the king of Shang. To his people, he wasn't just a ruler. He was the man who spoke to heaven. The world, according to Shang. If you were born in a Shang city, your world had a clear order. At the top, the king, the son of heaven, living in a walled capital of palaces, granaries, and ancestral temples. Around him, nobles and clan leaders who rode war chariots, hunted with bronze-tipped spears, and drank fragrant wine from heavy ritual cups. Below, craftsmen, farmers, laborers, slaves, all feeding the system with grain, bronze, and sweat. Every harvest, every storm, every victory in battle was understood through ritual. In the royal precinct, ox shoulder blades and turtle shells were heated until they cracked. The pattern of those cracks was read aloud. Will it rain? Will we win this battle? Is the ancestor pleased? The king authorized these questions. The priests interpreted them. The answers justified whatever came next. If heaven smiled, the Shang army marched. Their chariots, 2 horses, 3 men, bows and spears were the Ferraris of the Bronze Age. Any village or tribe that stood in their way felt those wheels before they ever saw the king's face. And for a long time, the system worked. Tribute flowed in. Enemies were crushed. The Shang name spread along the river valleys like floodwater. But every system has a breaking point, and for the Shang, that breaking point would sit on the throne itself. A king no one could trust. By the time we reach the late Shang, the king on the throne is remembered by one name that says everything: King Zhou of Shang. Not to be confused with the later Zhou dynasty, this Zhou is a personal name, and in later memory, it becomes synonymous with cruelty. Stories about him are soaked in legend and exaggeration, but they all point in the same direction. A king obsessed with pleasure and excess. A ruler who pours resources into palaces and parties while common people starve. A man who uses fear as his main tool of government. He builds huge complexes where he holds endless feasts, brings in musicians, dancers, and courtiers, and drowns his nights in wine while the kingdom's frontiers grow brittle. At the same time, punishments grow more brutal. Execution for minor disobedience. Collective punishment for families of suspected traitors. Tortures designed not just to kill, but to terrify everyone who hears about them. Whether every detail of these stories is literally true doesn't matter as much as this. For many in his realm, King Zhou stops looking like heaven's chosen and starts looking like a man heaven might want to replace. And in the Chinese political imagination, that idea has a name waiting for it: the mandate of heaven. The mandate no one owns forever. The mandate of heaven is a simple, dangerous idea. Heaven chooses a ruler. Heaven blesses him with order, harvests, victories. If the ruler becomes corrupt, cruel, or useless, heaven takes the mandate back. How do you know heaven is angry? Floods and droughts, famines, rebellions, defeats in war. In other words, when the world starts breaking, people start questioning the throne. Under King Zhou of Shang, the stories say, natural disasters hit. Fields fail. Rebellions flicker, then are crushed, then flicker again. Each one is a small crack in the image of the all-powerful Shang. On the western frontier of the Shang world, another clan is watching closely. They call themselves Zhou, the quiet power in the west, far from the main Shang capital, in a region of hills and river valleys. The Zhou live in a land that the Shang court considers useful, but not central. The Zhou raise horses and cattle, farm the land, and provide troops and tribute when ordered. On the surface, they are loyal vassals. But loyalty in a system like this has layers. The Zhou lords know the Shang state inside and out. What it demands, how it treats its allies. Where its borders are thin, they also know something else. Their own people respect them in a way many Shang peasants no longer respect their king. The Zhou court, at least in later tradition, is shown as stricter in morals, but kinder in practice, more interested in good governance than in spectacular cruelty, obsessed with the idea that power should match virtue. For years, the Zhou balance on a knife edge, too weak to openly challenge Shang, too strong to be crushed without cost. As King Zhou's rule grows more unstable, the Zhou leaders begin to whisper a thought that once would have sounded like treason. What if we hold the mandate now? What if heaven is done with Shang? And then something happens that makes that whisper impossible to ignore. When loyalty snaps in the Shang heartland, noble families are expected to send their sons to court as hostages and officials, guarantees of loyalty. One of those men is the father of a future Zhou king, later remembered as King Wen of Zhou, depending on the version of the story you follow. He is summoned to the Shang court, imprisoned or detained after King Zhou grows suspicious of Zhou's rising influence, kept under tight control, and then, according to many accounts, killed. Whether he dies in a dungeon or is simply humiliated and threatened, the effect is the same. The Zhou clan receives a clear message. You are not partners, you are tools, and tools can be broken. The son who inherits the Zhou leadership, later remembered as King Wu of Zhou, does not forget. He inherits not just land and warriors, he inherits a score to settle. The world tilts, by now, across the Shang realm. Frontier lords grumble about impossible demands. Peasants groan under labor and conscription. Prophets and diviners murmur that heaven is uneasy. In the Zhou territories, a different kind of conversation is happening. Scholars, warriors, clan elders gather in long halls lit by bronze lamps. They listen as envoys bring news. Another disaster in Shang lands. Another brutal punishment. Another group of disgruntled nobles looking for a safer banner to stand under. Piece by piece, an alliance forms, discontented Shang vassals. Border tribes willing to switch sides if it means better treatment. Those who believe the mandate of heaven has already slid invisibly from Shang to Zhou. King Wu of Zhou doesn't call it regime change, he calls it justice. He begins to prepare not just for a raid, not just for a revolt, but for something much larger. a dynasty killshot. And somewhere in the records of camps and mustering grounds, the future soldiers of Muye are counted. Seasoned Zhou, warriors, allied clans, and tens of thousands of men who have every reason to hate the Shang name. They don't know it yet, but many of them will walk onto the battlefield at Muye under Shang banners, and walk off it having helped destroy the very dynasty they were ordered to defend. Because by the time the two armies finally face each other outside Muye, the cracks in heaven's order will be wide enough for entire regiments to fall through. That's where the next chapter begins. By the time King Wu of Zhou decides to move, the Shang world is already tired. Tired of levies. Tired of taxes. Tired of a king who seems to ask for more blood than harvest. But tired is not the same as brave. Most people still expect to obey. King Wu's first task is not to swing a sword. It's to convince thousands of men that marching against Shang is not suicide. It's destiny. In the Western lands, messengers ride out under the Zhou banner. They carry more than military orders. They carry a story. The Shang king has lost the mandate of heaven. The disasters, the famines, the chaos. These are signs. Heaven now favors Zhou, not Shang. In an age where political theory denounces religious reality, that's not just propaganda. It's a license. One by one, allied clans and neighboring tribes answer the call. Some come because they hate the Shang. Some come because they trust Zhou leadership more than the current Son of Heaven. Some come because they smell opportunity in a collapsing system. In mustering fields outside Zhou strongholds, the army gathers. Columns of Zhou infantry with spears and wooden shields, chariots with bronze fittings, crewed by nobles and veteran warriors, auxiliaries from tribes on the fringes of the Shang world, tough fighters who've tasted Shang steel and want payback. They are not an endless sea. In pure numbers, Shang will still claim superiority. But this army has something the Shang court has forgotten how to create: a sense of shared purpose. Zhou officers don't have to pretend their men love them. They can see it in how they stand, how they listen. They aren't marching just away from fear. They're marching toward something. The march toward the Shang heartland is not a straight line. The Zhou army moves like a testing finger along the veins of the realm, feeling for resistance, watching who panics, studying which local lords close their gates and which quietly send supplies. Some Shang loyalists try to organize defenses. Others fail to receive the message in time. A few make a choice that will define the night at Muye. They turn in their hearts before they ever turn on the field. Around campfires, as the Zhou columns push east, men talk in low voices. In my village, the tax collectors took our last grain. My brother was conscripted and never came back. They sacrificed people, to ask heaven about the king's pleasure. The more they march, the more those stories turn from isolated complaints into a single burning emotion: resentment. Zhou commanders don't have to invent hatred of Shang. They just have to focus it. The king who waits too long. In the Shang capital, news arrives the way it always does. Couriers, dust-streaked, bowing low. Reports read in the echoing halls of palaces lit by bronze lamps. Advisors kneeling, voices careful, eyes on the king's face. The reports are bad. Zhou has mobilized. Allies are joining them. Border posts have fallen or gone silent. The court argues. Some officials urge a quick, overwhelming strike. Crush them now before their coalition fully forms. Others, fearful of the king's temper, say what they think he wants to hear. They are barbarians from the west. They will break against us. King Zhou of Shang, wrapped in the luxury and arrogance of long rule, makes the worst decision a threatened ruler can make. He underestimates. He believes. His chariots are the finest. His numbers are greater. His name alone will scare half the rebels back into obedience. He orders his own army to assemble. And when the call goes out, men don't come because they love him. They come because they have to. The Shang army that gathers near Muye, close to the capital at Yin, is impressive on paper. Elite charioteers from noble houses, large blocks of infantry drawn from across the kingdom, forced levies of peasants and slaves, handed weapons and shoved into ranks. On inspection, however, it's a different picture. At the core, a professional, privileged stratum, men whose families feast at the Shang court, warriors who have benefited from the system, land, status, slaves, officers who owe everything to the current dynasty. Around them, like a ragged cloak, stand thousands who have seen only the sharp end of Shang power. Farmers pulled from barely surviving fields, laborers who've worked on royal projects until their hands bled, prisoners of earlier campaigns, now forced to fight for the king who conquered them. They share the uniform. They do not share loyalty. In their minds, another thought scratches and refuses to go away. If Zhou wins, the world changes. If Shang wins, nothing changes. On a battlefield, that difference is everything. The night before Muye, two very different camps face each other across the dark. In the Zhou camp, fires burn in controlled lines. Officers move among the men, speaking not just of victory, but of justice. The talk is of heaven's mandate already shifted, of Shang as a rotten tree ready to fall with one push. Some men are afraid, many are tired, but when they look at King Wu, they see a man who eats with his troops, shares risks, frames the coming battle as punishment for a tyrant, not just another rich man's war. In the Shang camp, fires are scattered, irregular. Nobles drink to mask their nerves, boasting loudly because silence feels dangerous. The common soldiers stare into the dark and remember every time the king took and took and took. Some still fear Shang more than they fear Zhou. Some cling to the idea that heaven surely won let the Son of Heaven all fall. Others are simply empty. They will march when ordered. They will shout when commanded, but what they do when the lines collide is a question even they can't answer yet. Tradition says that on the eve of Muye, signs appear. Maybe it's strange winds, unlucky patterns in the stars, birds flying in the wrong direction, or maybe it's simpler. The king's sleep is troubled, his advisors are tense. The diviner's answers are less confident than usual. In the Zhou camp, omens are read a different way. The very fact that they've made it this far without being crushed feels like a sign. The erosion of Shang authority across the realm is treated as heaven's ongoing verdict. King Wu and his closest counselors stand apart from the men, looking toward the dim glow where they know the Shang camp lies. He doesn't need to say it, but he does, for those who will carry his words down the lines. If heaven still favored Shang, we would never have reached this place. The sky lightens in layers. First, the deep blue of almost night. Then, the faint gray where you can just make out silhouettes of men, chariots, banners. Then, the pale gold line on the horizon that says, "No more time for thinking." In the Shang camp, drums start to beat, slow, heavy. Men are shoved into formation, chariots in the front and flanks, ready to charge. Infantry in dense blocks, spears angled, rough lines stretching wide across the field, forced levies in the rear or along the edges, more bodies than soldiers. Officers shout, standards rise. From a distance, it looks like any proud Bronze Age host preparing to crush a rebellion. In the Zhou camp, the drums answer, faster, sharper. Zhou warriors tighten straps, check spearheads, touch the wood of their chariots as if greeting old friends. Some murmur prayers. Some smile with a kind of calm fury. When King Wu rides out before them, he's not glittering in unreachable splendor. He is close enough for men to see his face, to read his expression. The message is simple, without poetry. We finish this today. As both armies move toward Muye, there is an invisible line running through the Shang ranks. Those who still believe, those who are merely afraid, those who secretly hope Zhou wins. From the Zhou side, it just looks like one giant enemy formation. From inside the Shang formation, it feels like walking on a frozen lake that has already started to crack. Every step forward, every drumbeat, brings them closer to the moment when each man will decide. Not in words, but in action. Do I fight for this king or against him? When the first arrows fly and the first chariots begin to roll, that fault line will decide the battle faster than any clever tactic. Because at Muye, bronze and numbers matter. But what matters more is this. For the first time in Shang history, a huge part of its own army walks into battle not sure they want their king to live through it. And that uncertainty is the weapon King Wu is counting on, even if he can't see it yet. At Muye, the battlefield is not a neat open plain. It's a threshold. Behind the Shang army lies the road, back to the capital, to palaces, ritual bronzes, and ancestral temples. In front of them, advancing under banners marked Zhou, comes everything their king has refused to believe in. The anger of the countryside, the resentment of vassals, the quiet hatred of men who've had enough. The drums on both sides start to roll, and for a few moments, it still looks like any other Bronze Age battle. The first clash, the Zhou army advances in disciplined blocks. Infantry with spears and shields in ordered ranks, chariots ready to punch through weak points, allies spread along the line, knowing this is their one chance to break the Shang spell. From the Shang side, archers step forward. Bows rise, strings draw. The first volleys hiss out across the field. Shields thud. Dust jumps. Men fall. But the Zhou ranks keep coming. They've marched too far, gambled too much to stop now. Chariots surge on both sides. Shang chariots, with proud nobles gripping spears, thunder ahead to show that the old power still has teeth. Zhou chariots, lean and purposeful, swing to meet them. Wheels crash, horses scream, spears splinter. At the very front, where the nobles of both sides meet, it looks like any heroic age. Men shouting battle cries, personal duels buried in the larger clash, chariots skidding, turning, colliding. Up there, loyalty is real. Shang aristocrats still fight for their king because their entire lives are built on him. But behind them, in the deep ranks of Shang infantry, something very different is happening. The orders no one wants to hear. Shang officers walk the lines, shouting, "Forward! Tighten ranks! Hold the line for the king!" Men shift, adjust shields, brace spears. They move. But for many of them, each step feels like walking deeper into someone else's grave. Some of these soldiers have watched relatives die under Shang punishments, have been dragged from their villages with no promise of reward, have heard whispers that Zhou treats its people differently. They look ahead and see Zhou banners. They look behind and see the capital of a dynasty that has never loved them, only used them. And then they see something else. The Zhou soldiers aren't breaking. The rebel line does not crumble under the first arrow storms or chariot charges. If anything, it looks more solid than the army they themselves are standing in. That's when the orders start to sound less like commands from heaven, and more like demands from a doomed man. The first drops. No one knows exactly who moves first. History doesn't record his name. Maybe it's a conscript who's had enough. Maybe it's a prisoner from a conquered tribe. Maybe it's a man who has lost too many family members to Shang taxes and wars. What we're told is simple. In the middle of the Shang infantry, when the call comes to advance and clash with the Zhou front, some men lower their weapons. Not to charge, to drop them. A spear hits the ground. Then another. A shield slips from a hand, landing in the dirt like a quiet refusal. Around them, their comrades see and do the hardest thing in the world for a drilled soldier. They copy disobedience. A line that should surge forward becomes a line that hesitates. And on a battlefield, hesitation spreads faster than fire, turning the tide. Literally, from the Zhou side, it's hard to see the details. What they see is this. The Shang front wavers. Some sections don't actually close in. Gaps open where there should be contact. Zhou officers aren't sure yet if this is a trap or a miracle. They push the assault anyway. Spears thrust, shields slam, chariots smash through the places where Shang resistance is weakest. Inside the Shang ranks, the fault line finally opens. Some men do more than drop their weapons. They turn around. Not in an orderly retreat, but in a way no king ever wants to see. Spears angled not at the Zhou, but at their own officers. Those who try to force them forward at sword point suddenly find themselves surrounded by men who outnumber them 10 to 1 and have nothing left to fear. Shouts turn from "hold the line" to "enough, no more, down with Shang." It doesn't happen in every unit. The elites still fight. The nobles still throw their chariots at the enemy. But in key parts of the infantry, the Shang army stops being an army. It becomes a crowd. And a big part of that crowd no longer wants the king on the throne. The collapse at Muye. Once part of an army defects, the rest faces an impossible calculation. Fight forward, and you may be hit from behind. Turn back, and you admit the battle is lost. On the field at Muye, that logic rips the Shang formation apart. Some units keep fighting Zhou and die where they stand. Their loyalty buys them a place in legend and a grave in someone else's field. Others throw down arms and run. Their only thought is to escape the slaughter they feel rolling toward them. And some, according to the tradition that survives, actually join the Zhou on the spot or at least clear the way and refuse to interfere as Zhou troops punch holes straight through what used to be the royal army. From a distance, to anyone watching from high ground, it would look like this. The Shang line folds inward, its center rots. Zhou chariots and infantry push deeper and deeper, facing less resistance the closer they get. This is not a heroic last stand. It is a system collapsing in real time. The king's last illusion. Back near the rear, surrounded by the trappings of command, King Zhou of Shang watches the battlefield he thought he owned. He sees dust, confusion, clashing standards. His officers bring conflicting news. We're holding on the left. The center is breaking. Some of our troops refuse to advance. They're turning, my lord. For a ruler raised to believe he is the axis of the world, the mind resists the obvious conclusion. My army is not mine anymore. Maybe he orders a counterattack. Maybe he rallies what loyal chariots remain for one last charge. Maybe he simply stands there, realizing that every face turned toward him is now calculating whether loyalty is worth dying for. What we do know is this. He does not die at Muye. The battle ends with the Shang position ruined and the road to the capital blown open. The king who thought fear would keep the world in place turns his chariot around and runs. A dynasty in flight. As the wreckage of the Shang army scatters, the Zhou advance doesn't stop at counting bodies on the field. They know what Muye means. The spell of Shang authority is broken. The king has lost not just a battle, but the right to claim heaven's favor. Every vassal who was waiting to see which way the wind would blow now has their answer. King Wu doesn't need to chase every last Shang soldier. He needs to go where the mandate still lives in stone and ritual. The capital. The city whose palaces and temples taught generations to bow to Shang. As the Zhou army moves toward it, they're not just marching on a place. They're marching on the center of a story that's held China together for centuries. At Muye, that story cracked. In the capital, it will burn. And the last Shang king, who escaped the battlefield, will face a choice: surrender and live as the man who lost heaven, or die on his own terms, inside the world he built and broke. The road from Muye to the Shang capital is not long, but for the last Shang king, it must have felt endless. Behind him, on the field, lies everything he trusted: broken chariots, dead nobles, an army that decided, mid-battle, it was done. Obeying him, ahead of him lies the only place left where his power might still be real: the capital at Yin. The palaces and ancestral temples, the altars where generations of Shang kings fed the spirits of their dead. If heaven still favored Shang, this is where a miracle would happen. No miracle comes. News travels faster than armies. By the time the shattered remnants of the Shang host reach the capital, whispers have already arrived. The king's army broke. Soldiers threw down their weapons. Zhou is coming. Inside the walls, merchants quietly hide their valuables. Some nobles begin burning or burying documents they don't want a new regime to read. Servants listen at doors, hearing panic where confidence used to be. The king can still give orders, but the tone has changed. Obedience is now mixed with a calculation. If I help him now, will I die with him later? Every Shang official, every guard on the wall, every charioteer whose horses survived, feels the same cold math. The old fear of the king on one side, the new fear of Zhou on the other. And above them all, a different fear. What if heaven has already decided? Tradition said that in his final hours, the Shang king does not seek negotiation. He seeks confirmation. He turns to the same tools his ancestors used: ritual, divination, sacrifice. But where earlier kings asked, will this campaign succeed? Is the ancestor pleased? This king is staring at a different kind of question. Is it over? We don't have the exact words spoken over the last oracle bones heated in Shang fires. We don't know how the cracks were read. We know the result. He does not prepare the city for a heroic last stand. He prepares himself for an end. As the Zhou army approaches, setting up outside the capital and preparing for the final push, the last Shang king makes a decision. No dynasty survives. He will not face his enemies alive. In the innermost part of the palace complex, surrounded by piled treasures, precious bronzes, silks, and furs, his remaining favorites and attendants, he orders a great fire prepared. Stories say, wine flows like water, musicians play. He dresses in full ceremonial splendor one last time. It is a scene of denial and defiance. If I cannot have this world, no one will see me beg for a place in the next. When the flames are lit, they do not start timidly. Oil, lacquer, dry beams, silk hangings, everything eager to burn. Fire races along carved rafters and painted walls. The palace that once embodied Shang power turns into a furnace. Servants who can flee, flee. Others remain, whether by loyalty, force, or paralysis. At the heart of it, the last Shang king dies in the blaze he chose. No enemy sword takes him. No foreign hand drags him from a throne. He crowns his own ruin with fire. When King Wu of Zhou and his forces finally enter the Shang capital, they do not find a confident court waiting to negotiate terms. They find smoldering ruins where key palaces stood, treasury chambers looted or burned, scorched beams collapsing over piles of charred luxury, the stench of smoke, wine, and death. The Shang dynasty has not just fallen. It has destroyed its own image on the way down. For Zhou, this is both a victory and a warning. A victory because the old Son of Heaven is gone, his authority visibly broken. A warning because this is what happens when a ruler refuses to accept that his time has ended. In the aftermath, Zhou soldiers secure the city, guarding storehouses that survived, protecting key temples from looting, because now those temples will legitimize them, rounding up remaining nobles and officials. But the real work is not just military, it is narrative. To rule in the open, King Wu needs more than sharp blades and loyal men. He needs a story that explains why he, a man from the West, from a once subordinate clan, now sits where Shang kings once sat. That story is built fast, and it is ruthless. Shang is not just defeated, Shang is declared morally finished. In later accounts, King Zhou of Shang becomes the model of the corrupt, decadent tyrant. His palace of fire becomes proof that heaven rejected him. Every cruel act, every excess, every strange ritual is collected, polished and retold to justify his fall. The message: we did not just overthrow a king. Heaven dismissed him. We only carried out the verdict. At the same time, Zhou thinkers and scribes shape their own image. King Wen, the father, as the wise, patient visionary who first sensed Shang's decay. King Wu, the son, as the brave executor of heaven's will. The Zhou house as virtuous, restrained, properly respectful of heaven, ancestors and people. Where Shang cracked bones to seek guidance, Zhou will later write texts to teach what the mandate of heaven means. And the first lesson is simple. No dynasty owns it forever. Zhou could have tried to wipe Shang from memory. They don't. Instead, in many versions of the story, they do something more subtle and smarter. Some Shang nobles are spared and given roles in the new order. The Shang ancestral temple is maintained. Zhou rulers perform sacrifices there too, at least for a time. The last Shang king is remembered not as a threat, but as a warning example. By honoring Shang ancestors while condemning the last Shang king, Zhou sends a layered message. To the people: we respect the past. We are not here to erase your world, only to fix it. To future rulers, and to themselves: abuse the mandate, and you will end like him. The capital changes hands. The banners over the city gate change symbols. But the mandate logic remains. Rulers are accountable, not to voters, not to parliaments, but to heaven as expressed through the fate of the people. With Shang gone and Zhou in power, the Battle of Muye becomes something more than a military victory. It becomes a mythic moment when the moral universe was reset, a precedent for future rebellions. If a dynasty fails its duty, it can be justly overthrown. A template for how later historians will explain dynastic change for centuries. Every later collapse, every time a new house rises over an old one, will be framed through the lens sharpened here. Corruption at the top, suffering below, signs in nature and society. A rebel who is not just ambitious, but morally right. Muye stands at the start of that pattern, a battlefield where an army decided it was done dying for a king it did not believe in. A capital watched its own ruler light his world on fire. A new dynasty walked through the smoke and said, "Heaven is with us now." For your channel, this battle isn't just China's ancient civil war. It's the night a Bronze Age superpower discovered a truth every empire fears. You can rule by fear for a long time, but the moment your soldiers stop believing you speak for something higher than yourself, your dynasty is already burning. Official histories remember kings. King Zhou of Shang, last of his line. King Wu of Zhou, first of the new order. But the hinge of Muye isn't a duel between great men. It's a decision made thousands of times in ordinary hearts. The peasant who doesn't lower his spear to charge. The conscript who quietly steps out of line instead of closing the gap. The slave soldier who realizes the men in front of him might treat him better than the man behind. No one writes their names. Yet without them, Zhou doesn't win. Muye is the moment when the invisible majority of the system, those who carry spears but own nothing, decide they won't die to protect someone else's throne anymore. That decision becomes part of the unwritten memory of the land. If a ruler goes too far, it is possible to walk away from him, even in the middle of a battle. Today, the Shang palaces are ash and archaeology. The Zhou kings are long gone. But the questions Muye forces are still alive. How long can a state run on fear before fear stops working? What happens when a leader mistakes obedience for loyalty? What do soldiers owe a ruler who no longer protects them, but only himself? For your viewers, the Battle of Muye isn't just an obscure Bronze Age clash in ancient China. It's a pattern, a decaying power that refuses to admit it's decaying. A rising force that claims moral as well as military superiority. An army that, at the crucial moment, chooses its own future. On that night at Muye, heaven didn't send down lightning. It did something quieter and far more dangerous for any tyrant. It withdrew belief. And once the men with spears stop believing, no number of chariots, no pile of bronze, no blazing palace is enough to save a dynasty that's already over.